Welcome, watch enthusiasts. I'm Mike, and today we'll start our watchmaking journey by servicing and refinishing this Omega wristwatch with Omega's in-house caliber 1020 movement that was introduced in the early 1970s and is used in many of their Geneve and Seamaster models. This is a gold-filled watch which can be found in today's used market in the mid-hundreds of dollars. While this movement has been somewhat controversial because of its use of some plastic parts and not so flashy appearance, it was a joy to work on, features a day and date hacking second hand, automatic winding, and a thin, lightweight design that keeps really accurate time. This is the first video in a three-part series where we will evaluate the watch in detail and do a complete disassembly and cleaning of the movement. In part 2, we'll rebuild the movement, and in part 3, you'll see the repair and restoration of the bracelet and acrylic crystal and the recasing of the watch. I've also released a companion video explaining how to use a timegrapher to calibrate this movement to keep perfect time. As these videos get released, I'll put links in the description below. For now, please take a moment to click that like button and subscribe. It really helps send a message to YouTube that you support this kind of content. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to your comments in the space below. Since the watch was running when I got it, I put it on the timegrapher to get a baseline idea of how well it's keeping time. Are you seeing this? That's actually pretty amazing. The flat line on the timegrapher display indicates the watch is keeping time to 2 seconds per day in the horizontal or dial-up position. In different positions, the timekeeping is good, but the amplitude, shown as AMP, drops. I hope a complete service will raise the amplitude and consistency in various positions, which simulates what performance will be like when you're wearing the watch throughout the day. So, probably not new, but new to me is quick release on a dedicated strap. It's pretty cool, right? Right there we have a bend. And since this is just a folded link, I'm hoping we can clean that up. Here's a first look at the movement. I love the coppery color of the metal, but yuck, the gasket has melted and gotten all over the place. To remove the movement, we need to remove the winding stem, which comes out when we press this setting lever button. I'm lifting up on the movement to remove it from the case rather than flipping it over because I don't want to tumble out any gasket crumbs that might be in the case. Fortunately, none of the pieces of gasket has made it to the dial side of the watch, and I really like this dial. There's a spacer which is friction fit into the back of the watch, and now we can start plowing out this nasty, sticky old gasket. I'm using isopropyl alcohol and a toothpick. The inside of the watch back is written in French, and there's no evidence that a prior watchmaker has serviced the watch. The gold-plated watch case is in pretty good shape for a 50-year-old watch, and the crystal appears to be original and has lots of scuffs and scratches. In video 3 of this series, I'll show you how I made this crystal look almost new. And what's this between the chunky lugs? 20 ohms? 20 omegas? I guess they didn't have a micron punch. I want to remove the crystal, but it's held in place by this gold bezel. I'm going to use a utility knife blade to see if I could wedge it away from the body. Yeah, I think it's coming away. Good. Yes, sirree. There it is. The crystal pops out with a little thumb pressure from behind. This is what's called an armored crystal, meaning it has a reinforcing metal band built into the bottom. I want to remove the hand so I can take the dial off the movement. I'll reinstall the stem first so I can align the hands. A piece of clear plastic protects the dial while I use these levers to lift the hands off of the posts in the center of the watch. I'm inspecting the front and back of the hands as I remove them, and I notice that the tip of the second hand has a bend. We'll have to fix that before reassembling. As I continue with the disassembly, you'll see me cleaning to remove bits of that melted gasket or any other debris that simply doesn't belong. Here's a look under the microscope. I'm examining the movement looking for broken jewels, taking a look at the condition of the hairspring, seeing if there's wear or damage on any of the plates or moving parts. It's dirty, but preliminarily everything looks pretty good. The movement is held into the case spacer ring with 2 screws and mounting clips. Removing the spacer ring gives us access to the dial foot screws that attach the dial. Try to pull the dial straight off to avoid bending it. Mine was giving me a little bit of trouble, so I had to go back and loosen one of the dial foot screws just a little bit more. That should do it. As you remove the dial, be careful that you don't damage the thin dial spacer attached to the back of the dial. With the dial off, I like to go back and partially reseat the dial foot screws so I don't lose them in the cleaning process. We can now turn our attention to getting that winding rotor and automatic winding module out of the way. Something was preventing the winding rotor from coming off easily, so I decided to loosen the entire module. What are these, metal chips? That's not good. Compared to other Swiss watches, these screws are super tiny. I carefully loosened the winding module, and that was just enough to free the winding rotor. There's a driving gear on the automatic winding module that slides under the ratchet wheel. Make sure when you remove this part, you slide it straight out so you don't bend that wheel. The gears in the winding module allow the watch to wind when the rotor turns in either direction. Let's get the balance assembly out of the way so we don't damage that delicate hairspring. With the balance safely in my parts bin, I can take a closer look at it under the microscope. Hey, that's something I've never seen before. It looks like the hairspring is held into the stud with shellac. I've flipped the watch over to the dial side, and we're going to start taking apart the calendar works, starting with the day wheel. Did you notice there's the letter A between Friday and Saturday? What's that for? Let me know in the comments below. I mentioned earlier that this watch has tiny screws, but these screws are ridiculously tiny. With the day wheel out of the way, we can get a better idea of how the calendar works function. Here's setting position. Pay attention to this spring because it's kind of unusual the way it's going across the tip of those teeth. That's the day corrector and the day corrector spring. It seems kind of primitive, but it gets the job done. And speaking of kind of primitive, here are the 2 plastic pieces I mentioned in my intro, the Daystar driving wheel and the cam for the date indicator driving wheel. I understand why you might be surprised to see plastic parts in an Omega, but these were in good shape and they were doing their job. By contrast, this spring-loaded date jumper is made of metal and feels plenty robust. And then in would be our winding position. Middle position, quick set, and you can go in either direction. So time setting, this little arm down here pushes that cog away from the date wheel, so it's not turning. I'll continue the disassembly of the calendar works by carefully removing the day corrector spring. And now I can remove the guard plate that secures the rest of the calendar works. Ooh, strobe light. The star-shaped day corrector wheel that we saw from the other side is held onto the plate with a keyhole slot. I'm using my plastic stick to remove the date wheel so I don't scratch it. And I'm using brass tweezers to disassemble the rest of the parts so I don't scratch the main plate or any of the parts. The disassembly continues by removing the hour wheel, this double date setting wheel, the minute wheel, and the setter wheel with the attached cannon pinion. More on this later. This screw holds down the day and date driving wheels. This is called the day star driving wheel. See that little thumb? That engages with that cam for the date driving wheel below it. And finally, the date indicator driving wheel comes off. How does it look on the other side? A little dried oil, but otherwise good. Now, before we take apart the keyless works, I noticed that there's a fair amount of muck in various places. So let's see if we can just demuck some of this. The keyless works is a fairly robust system that switches the watch between setting and running positions. We're going to start with this setting lever spring. You'll notice that a lot of these parts are actually protective plates that hold the parts underneath them. We're now going to remove the yoke spring. So many parts in a watch are under tension. Part of the skill is how to relieve the tension without sending those parts flying. Oh, and look what I just did. I sent a screw flying from the pressure spring for the setting lever. We'll have to find that later. There's the screw. It fell into the movement and is under the escape wheel. Right now I'm relieving the pressure on this yoke spring for the date corrector so I can remove them. This is the date corrector with its 3 stacked rotating wheels on the end. Make a mental note of that little post on the bottom. When I reassembled the watch, I did it incorrectly. I make mistakes, so you don't have to. Wait, what's this on my work mat? Oh no, that's the center seconds pinion. It must have fallen out when I turned over the movement. Glad we found it. And with that, the yoke comes out. This might be a thin watch movement, but that piece is thick as a beast. Here's the setting lever, and that pin hanging down is the button that you press to detach the winding stem. Here comes the winding stem, followed by the winding pinion, and the sliding clutch, or as Omega calls it, the clutch wheel. With the keyless works parts out of the way, we can inspect the main plate for grime and wear. Fortunately, it looks like we just have grime. With the dial side of the watch empty, we can now switch to the back or train side of the watch. So he is still in there. Let's pull back the click and carefully let the power out of the mainspring before disassembling the train of wheels. Now we can remove the pallet fork bridge, which holds down the pallet fork, which is sometimes called the anchor. You'll see why in just a second. You just want to lift up very easily, and it's okay that the pallet fork came with. And there's the pallet fork bridge. Kind of looks like a toilet seat. Let's take a look at the pivots and the jewels on the pallet fork. They look good. Excellent. As I remove the train wheel bridge, I'm reminding myself to be careful about lifting the bridge straight up so I don't disrupt the position of the wheels, so I can observe exactly how it goes back together. That plastic piece is called the stop lever, sometimes called a hack, and it stops the watch hands when you pull out the winding stem. Let's slide out the escape wheel. There's our mischievous screw. I don't want to go on the cart. Here's the fourth wheel. And it seems like the third wheel is still attached by something on the other side of the movement. Okay, let's move on. Here's the second wheel. It has some caked on oil, but otherwise looking good. If my research serves me correctly, the third wheel is being held on by a small cannon pinion. Got him. Called the cannon pinion of the third wheel. Before removing the barrel holding the mainspring, we have to take a couple of components off of the mainspring bridge. We'll start with the click, which is this little piece of metal that keeps the mainspring from unwinding, and then we can remove the ratchet wheel. Now we can remove the click spring. We can now turn our attention to removing these three wheels which wind the watch. This is an intermediate setting wheel. And if you look closely, you'll see that there's a setting wheel ring sitting on top of that post. There it is. This is the crown wheel, and it is held in place by a spacer. There's nothing like old watch oil to make a part stick to your tweezers. That top edge is just slightly beveled, and the bottom edge, not as much. So let's take off the barrel bridge, and then we can look at this from underneath. That wiggly wheel is called the wigwag pinion, and it's built to move back and forth to allow you to manually wind the watch. It's held in place by a special screw and a locking nut that's located underneath the barrel bridge. That locking nut is shaped to slide back and forth in that channel. There we go. And if we look at the back of that wigwag pinion, there's a washer. And a closer look at the nut that holds the screw, it looks like, is that some Rodico stuck to the top of the that nut? I think it is. Speaking of Rodico, let's use some to remove the washer from the top of that wigwag pinion. Now we can remove the barrel complete, which contains the mainspring, and remove the wigwag pinion spring. Whoops! Gotcha. The final part to be removed is the center seconds pinion friction spring. This spring applies slight pressure to that delicate pinion and makes the second hand turn more smoothly. The theory behind an automatic watch is that it converts the kinetic energy of you moving your arm while wearing the watch to elastic potential energy that's stored in the watch mainspring. The train of wheels and escapement then release this energy in a metered fashion, which in turn lets the watch rotate the hands exactly once every hour, minute, or second. As I mentioned earlier, this watch auto-winds when the weighted rotor turns in either direction. The Omega 1020's auto winding design is straightforward and easy to service, with just 4 components sandwiched between 2 plates. Generally speaking, each wheel has a larger pinion or pivot that's oriented pointing down into the lower auto winding bridge. You can usually pop the lid off the mainspring barrel by pressing the arbor down on a hard flat surface, but this barrel didn't want to pop. I pried it with a thin screwdriver to get it started, but in retrospect I probably could have used the utility blade from the bezel removal. I used my brass tweezers to keep the spring in the barrel until the cover was off. There we go. And then unwound it by hand 1 loop at a time. I couldn't easily free the arbor from the end of the spring, so I stabilized it with a lump of Rodico putty. Experience has taught me that if you let a mainspring fling its winding arbor, then it flies fast and far. And being on my hands and knees looking for a part was a game I didn't want to play. Okay, well, that could have been smoother, but at least we still have the arbor. The majority of the watch's parts will be run through my ultrasonic cleaning regimen. To preserve the costly solvents, I'll pre-clean the watch components by hand. Here I'm removing the upper and lower balance jewels so I can clean the main plate more effectively. I'm using a sticky jewel picker-upper tool to transfer the synthetic ruby jewels to a contact lens container for storage. Later they'll be cleaned, oiled, and reinstalled. So that is lower, or L. The metal clips that secure each 2-part jewel assembly are called shock mounts, and they protect the balance wheel pivots from damage caused by impact. I'm temporarily reinstalling the balance on the main plate to give me a stable hold on the balance cock as I remove the jewels from this side of the watch. When done, I'm going to re-secure the shock spring and remove the balance for pre-cleaning the main plate, after which the balance gets reinstalled to run through the ultrasonic cleaner. If you're new to watchmaking, balance removal and installation is a great skill to practice that you'll definitely use often. I like to pre-clean parts in a glass petri dish using naphtha, which can be purchased inexpensively at most big box hardware stores. I'm using a stiff synthetic paintbrush to loosen the grime, and then switching to a piece of pegwood that's been sharpened with faceted sides, which I'm spinning in every jewel hole, pivot point, and crevice on the main plate. I'll repeat this process on the other side, blow and blot off the excess, and then rinse the part in isopropyl alcohol to remove any residue. With the main plate pre-cleaned, I'm reinstalling the balance, and then placing the assembly into a stainless steel mesh basket, which will then be run through the 3 stages of my ultrasonic cleaner. The process is repeated for most of the remaining movement parts, with the larger components going directly into a cleaning basket. The winding stem had some rust that wouldn't come off. I'll run it through the ultrasonic, but it's going to get some special attention in video 3 when I recase the watch. I gave the train of wheels a little soak. I pre-cleaned the train wheels, but they still look dirty. So I used Rodico to lift away whatever grime I could. Like a little peek. So it looks like stuff is actually coming off. Hey, that's looking much better. All smaller parts, excluding the thin wire springs and pallet fork, were bathed and brushed and placed into tiny metal capsules to protect them, and then put into a mesh basket for ultrasonic deep cleaning. My watch cleaning station is a 3-liter ultrasonic tank in which I've placed 3 200-milliliter jars. The jars sit in a water bath that I've heated to 45 degrees Celsius, which effectively transfers the ultrasonic waves to the solution inside the jars. Each parts basket gets a 5-minute clean, followed by 2 5-minute rinses. By overlapping the wash and rinse cycles, I can run 3 baskets through all 3 stages in about half an hour, allotting for time to move them along in between. As parts come out of the final rinse, the baskets are emptied into clean Petri dishes and dried with a warm air blower, which is meant for drying fingernail polish. Here's a look at the tiniest parts being unloaded from one of the small brass and stainless mesh baskets. I'll put a screen over them so they don't blow around and set them under the dryer. After the parts are clean, I used my reference video to regroup the components in my trays to make the movement easier to reassemble, which I'll show you step by step in part 2 of this Learning Watchmaking video series. I'm Mike. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please like this video and support the channel by subscribing. As always, I look forward to your comments and questions in the space below.